we as Christians have a complicated relationship with this text. And part of the reason we have a complicated relationship with this text is that far too often, whenever we read it, whenever we talk about it, which we do a lot. Like if you've been a Christian most of your life, you've probably heard the story before, right? Raise your hand. Have you all heard the story before? Yeah, right? Like we hear it all the time. And here's the thing about the story is when we talk about it, when we preach about it, when we do Bible studies on it, we almost always get stuck right at the climax, right? Right when she's putting in those coins. And we talk all about that and we ignore everything that comes before, right? We never talk about, why is he condemning the scribe? We never talk about paragraph 1. But not talking about paragraph 1 is like having a book report due on the trilogy of the Rings, right? Lord of the Rings. And deciding, well, I don't want to read like 3 whole books about hobbits. I'll just skip to the climax of the story and just read that. And so you're like, all right, I got this dude. He's really hairy. He eats like 12 times a day. He's taking a ring and he's throwing it in a volcano. Okay. And that saves the world. Well then, there's my book report. If you turn that in, you're getting an F, right? Because you've missed all the whole point. Even if you understood the climax, understood Frodo saved the world, you missed really the whole point of the books if you don't have the context, if you don't know why it's important. So let's start at the beginning. Why is Jesus talking bad about a scribe? Okay. What's the scribe doing? The scribe is going around and trying to get all the places of honor and wear long robes and say long, glorious prayers to look important, right? He wants everyone out there to know that he is enough. He is someone. Why would a scribe want to do that? Why does anyone want to do that? Very simply this. People who do that because somewhere deep down in their heart, they are telling themselves they're not enough. That sort of arrogance, that sort of bravado comes from one place and one place only: insecurity and pain. See, somewhere deep down, that committee we all have in our heads, you know, the one that tells you, oh, I should have said that when they said it to me 9 hours ago. That would have been the perfect comeback. You all know about that committee, right? The one that picks you apart and says, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should be better about this, you should have been better about that. You know, when your kid said that, he probably meant that, and you should have responded this way, but you didn't. Idiot. That committee. Deep down, his committee is telling him he is not enough. Because that committee is listening to the world. Because here's the thing about the world, is the world is going to go around and the world is always going to tell you, you are not enough. Don't believe me? Let's talk about cosmetics for a moment. In cosmetics, huge international conglomerates out there, right? If the cosmetic company knows that you come from a country where most people are light-skinned, they're going to tell you, you're not pretty enough. You know what you should do? You should tan. However, if you come from a country where the majority of people are dark-skinned, you know what they'll tell you? You're not pretty enough. What you need to do is use bleaching agents. Folks, you'll never be pretty enough by the world's standards. Because the world is sinful, and the world is fallen, and the world is messed up. Example number 2. In the early 2000s, back when magazines existed, there was a lead men's magazine and a lead women's magazine. The lead men's magazine was known as Maxim. The lead women's magazine was known as Cosmopolitan, or short Cosmo. Those of you who are other millennials like myself probably remember those days, right? Okay. Here's the thing. A sociologist went in and asked which one, the one geared towards men or the one geared towards women, they both, by the way, had lots of pictures of women for very different reasons in them, which one had a more realistic body type? This is how messed up the world is. The men's magazine was the answer. Because the women in the women's magazine was more unrealistic because they wanted to drive the point home to all the young girls, all the women out there, you're not enough. But if you buy my thing for only 3 installments of $100, maybe you will. By the way, you won't. They'll still tell you you're ugly, even though you're beautiful, even though you are enough. Now, don't just think this is a thing that only affects women. Let's talk about something we all know about. I want you to raise your hand when I name the name if you've ever heard of this person. Who here has heard of Joe Montana? Raise your name. Raise your hand. Keep them up. Keep them up. Heard of Emmitt Smith? Add yourself in there. If you've heard of Aaron Rodgers, add yourself in there. All right, that's basically everyone. And for the 3 of you that did not raise your hand, you're either incredibly shy or have a scaringly lack of knowledge of football. One or the other, I'm not here to judge. But here's the situation. All 3 of them have 2 big things in common. In their heyday, all 3 of them were the greatest of their time, if not the greatest of all time, right? We're talking crazy records set by Aaron Rodgers, Emmitt Smith, these folks, right? Joe Montana. How many Super Bowls that man win in a row? We would think that if anyone got the message that they were enough, it would surely be these guys, right? And yet we see them also do a crazy, insane thing. They got to their pinnacle with their team. They stayed there for some period of time. At some point, their coach said, hey, it's time for the next generation to come on in. And all 3 of them went, well, heck with you, I'm going to another team. And that's how you end up with Emmitt Smith on the Cardinals? Joe Montana with his 1 year with the Chiefs? And right now, folks, Aaron Rodgers on the Jets. It's just sad, right? I mean, they're only 1 game ahead of the Dolphins, and you never want to be only 1 game ahead of the Dolphins. Because even though they've achieved probably some of the greatest acts of their profession, the world tells even them, you're not enough. Because they're still looking for this outer validation, not realizing the validation will never come from the world. The world never validates anyone ever. Validation comes from within, with our relationship with God. See, when you trace the world, you end up on the Jets. When you chase God, when you're there with God, when you come to the table of God, when your committee is listening to God's table, not the world's table, what do we find? We find Moses, arguably the greatest of the prophets of the Old Testament, right? And I know I got Elijah fans out there, we can debate later. But here's the thing. Who is he when he starts? He is a free-ish member of an enslaved people. He is wanted for murder and on the run. He stutters so bad he doesn't talk in public because he's embarrassed by himself. Because he believes deep down he is not enough. When that burning bush and the voice of God comes to him, does he fall on his knees and say, yes, Lord, yes? No, he says, who the heck do you think you're talking to? Because it surely ain't me. Let me go through my bio. Jesus met that man, that very imperfect man, that man who had anger issues, and said, Moses, you're enough. Because with you, I can create abundance. Saul turned Paul. The guy committed genocide. We all got that from the Bible, right? The guy had lots of issues. And yet God was able to take him and make him the greatest evangelist of the New Testament. Heck, when God got to pick any human to pick, what parents did he pick for his son? A mother who is an unwed teenage mother who has politically extreme values, who is so hated by her husband's family that when she's 9 months pregnant in his hometown, no one is daring cross grandma and letting them in, so they have to have a baby in a barn. You think your family's messed up? Wait till you read all about Jesus's. Doesn't stop there, guys. Reason Matthew starts with genealogy. In all those cases, God takes people for who they are and says, you are enough. Not just are you enough, but let me show you what abundance I can bring from the little you have. This, by the way, is why when a kid brings a handful of loaves and some fishes, he doesn't just feed 5,000. He has enough food for 5,000 more. Why when the widow comes by and puts in her 2 penny-like things, Jesus goes, look, she has done what I asked. She brought her whole self to the game. And even though we as humans and by world standards say she doesn't have much, she's not worth much, God creates abundance from the little we bring. The problem with the rich man isn't that they're rich. The problem with the rich man isn't some sort of percentage game. I've heard so many sermons about that. The problem with the rich man is that he's putting the money in because he wants the world to look at him, because he wants the world to say, you're enough, and validate him. Jesus isn't mad at the rich man. Jesus feels bad for him. He knows deep down in that rich man's heart is a committee that does nothing but tell him how bad he is. He doesn't know how much he's loved, how much he's cared for. He doesn't realize he's enough. And in the pursuit of trying to get the world to tell him enough, God knows how many bad things he's done, how many widows he's stepped on, how many houses he's consumed, all trying to fill a God-sized hole in his heart, just looking for love. The same hole we all have. As you go out today into the world, in your prayer life, take a few minutes and ask yourself, that committee in my head, the one that comes up when I turn out the lights and I lay my head on my pillow, what table is that committee sitting at? Is it sitting at a table of the world's judgment and condemnation? Or is it sitting at the table of God, hearing, you are enough. Let me show you how I can create abundance.